An ominous, intense crimson glow burned on the horizon ahead as the huge silver B-29s flew low over the Pacific. Would be no difficulty in locating the target that night of March 10th, 1945. It was clearly marked for all in the formation to see, burning like a funeral pyre, the flames practically licking the night sky. Far back in the formation, Richard Bale of the 9th Bombardment Group in his Super Bombardment 3 could barely read a newspaper in the cockpit because of the fires engulfing Tokyo below. He flew over the target and dropped his bombs. He could not help but think of the sheer horror unfolding below him. Often cited as the most destructive bombing raid in human history, more devastating than the bombing of Dresden, it claimed more lives and caused more urban destruction than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki a few months later. The bombing of Tokyo, also known as Operation Meeting House, was a series of incendiary attacks conducted by the United States Army Air Forces during the Pacific campaigns in 1945, months before the deployment of nuclear bombs. Conservative estimates suggest that the firestorm caused by the incendiary bombs killed at least 80,000 people, and probably over 100,000 in a single night, with around 1 million people left homeless. The Japanese later called it the Night of the Black Snow. This is a story that goes far beyond the simple bombing of a capital city. Today, we will understand the details of why it was a far more destructive event than other bombings during World War II. The horror that Bale witnessed was the result of months of planning, several failures, a few experiments, and relatively few successes. In the summer of 1944, the United States Marine Corps and Army captured 3 islands in the Mariana Chain: Saipan, Tainan, and Guam. These islands, unlike other recent conquests, were not simply stepping stones to Tokyo. They were strategically important and would play a vital role in the defeat of Japan in the months to come. The strategic location of the Mariana Islands put Japan within range of the Army Air Force's B-29 super freighter bombers. These new heavy aircraft had an impressive range of over 3,100 miles and a maximum altitude of over 30,000 feet. The B-29s were designed to fly at altitudes so high that most enemy fighters could not reach them, allowing them to drop their bombs with maximum precision and effectiveness on their targets. All leave a partial list of B-29 missions from 1944 to 1945 in the video description. Although B-29s had been bombing Japan from China since mid-1944, it was not until November 24th that they began operating from the massive new airfields in the Mariana Islands that the first transoceanics bombing raid in history took place. It was also the first time a formation of American aircraft had flown over Tokyo since Jimmy Doolittle's raiders in 1942. The November 24th raid, while highly publicized, caused little damage. Incredibly high winds and dense clouds limited the attack to just 24 bombers. Bombs dropped on the capital were widely missed, and more raids followed with more failures. The B-29s, flying at 33,000 feet, were rapidly depleting their fuel tanks due to strong headwinds, causing many to crash into the sea on their return. Unable to return to the islands with the precious fuel needed to bring their crews back alive. Even when the winds were not so intense at lower altitudes, the newly discovered jet stream often blew at over 400 kilometers per hour, around 7,000 meters, deflecting hundreds of bombs falling on Japan and carrying them harmlessly out to sea, where they accumulated a staggering kill of fish, leaving any Japanese fisherman green with envy. Resources and lives were being wasted on high-altitude daylight raids. It became clear that something had to be done. That's when the general known as Iron Ass entered the scene. General Curtis LeMay officially assumed command of 21 Bomber Command in January 1945 and was immediately given responsibility for conducting the strategic air campaign against the Japanese home islands. Initially, LeMay's results were painfully similar to those of his predecessor. LeMay realized that the problem lay not in the capabilities of the men, but in the approach being used to get the job done. High-altitude bombing strategies over Japan were no longer effective due to the winds and unpredictable weather. Faced with the implicit threat of a possible amphibious invasion of the Japanese home islands, which could result in an estimated 1 million American casualties, LeMay, also known as Iron Ass, decided to change his tactics drastically. He began using Superfortress bombers to conduct extremely aggressive air raids on Japan. LeMay decided to abandon the tactics used in Europe and ordered his pilots to do the opposite of what they had been trained to do. Instead of flying high-altitude daylight raids, he ordered the B-29s to be converted into low-altitude night attackers. His advisors convinced the ME that Japan lacked significant low-altitude anti-aircraft defenses and that enemy fighters would be less effective against low-flying bombers in complete darkness at altitudes between 330 and 9,000 feet. Flying at low altitude would neutralize the jet stream and allow crews to direct their bombs more precisely toward their targets. Although absolute accuracy was not necessarily critical, American heavy bombers favored the use of 480-pound and 1,000-pound high explosive bombs. These bombs had proven highly effective against the stone and concrete cities of Europe. However, when it came to Japanese cities, especially Tokyo, high-explosive bombs were not as effective. Initially, small-scale incendiary attacks were carried out by IME teams with some success on cities such as Nagoya and Kobe, which suffered from incendiary raids. In order to neutralize Japan's warfighting capabilities, LeMay believed that the best strategy was to burn its wooden cities to the ground. Therefore, he ordered Mission 38 to continue with massive incendiary raids to achieve this goal. For a firestorm to be as destructive as possible, at least one caused by man, the conditions had to be right. The weather had to be dry, and had to have been dry for some time. There had to be strong winds, and in the case of Tokyo, winds blowing from the north. Finally, the target's firefighting capability had to be limited. The imperial capital of Tokyo met all of these requirements on the night of March 9th to 10. Tokyo was exceptionally dry for that time of year, with little recent rain, and the city's wooden structures were bone dry. Winds on the night of March 9th and into the early hours of March 10th were strong. Gusts of over 100 kilometers per hour were recorded in several parts of the city. Tokyo's firefighting capability was virtually non-existent given the size of the city. Only about 8,000 firefighters were assigned to the Tokyo area, and of those 8,000, only 1,000 were equipped with firefighting equipment. Surprisingly, the city had only 3 firefighting ladders. Furthermore, there were no bomb shelters available in the city. To accomplish his goal, LeMay selected a relatively small area in Tokyo, measuring 3 by 4 square kilometers, home to approximately 750,000 people. American intelligence had correctly identified this specific area of Tokyo is home to a significant concentration of small factories that constituted the domestic productive capacity of Japanese industry. With a target in place, the planes were loaded and the crews properly briefed. Beginning at 5:30 p.m. on March 9, 1945, the first B-29 took off from Northfield in Wam. Then, over 29s took off from Wam, Saipan and Tinian at 50-second intervals, all bound for Tokyo. The mission, codenamed Operation Meeting House, was officially underway. Around 10:30 p.m., Air raid sirens blared across Tokyo, though many residents paid little heed. Some citizens responded quickly by emerging from their wooden houses, but many remained indifferent. Although Tokyo had been bombed before, only once at night and by a smaller number of planes, this time was different. Observers on the Japanese coast heard the approach of the bomber formation around midnight, but were initially confused by the sound of so many aircraft flying so low. They hesitated to report the impending attack until 12 a.m., by which time it was unfortunately too late. The first B-29s to arrive in Tokyo were the Pathfinders, whose mission was to mark the target area for the next wave of bombers. These Pathfinders approached the target from opposite directions and dropped their loads, which scattered across the wooden roofs and immediately set off explosions and flames. With the Pathfinders' work done, the operation continued. That night, subsequent B-29s dropped over 1,665 tons of incendiary bombs on Tokyo. The napalm in these bombs consumed everything it touched. Each of the B-29's 279 bomb loads covered an area approximately 600 meters long by 91 meters wide. Within an hour of the initial fire starting, the conflagration had spread beyond the target area, and the firestorm that Lamai had long desired was achieved with devastating results. Citizens of the region ran through the streets in panic, desperate to find any form of shelter from the scorching heat. Temperatures reached an incredible 1,800 degrees Celsius in some places, depleting the air of oxygen and suffocating those who were not consumed by the flames. People's clothing, even if not directly ignited by the bombs, literally caught fire from the intense heat. The glass in the windows began to liquefy, and the cyclonic winds of the firestorm hurled the molten glass into the air, raining down on the people like a violent storm. As people began to flee, their first instinct was to head for the water. It was believed that the water would provide relief from the intense heat and protect those sheltering in it from the flames that were now engulfing block after block of Tokyo. However, that night, water proved to be no salvation from the fire. Futaba High School was known for its large swimming pool and brick buildings, so people crowded into the school, hoping to reach the pool or seek shelter inside its structures. By dawn, thousands of bodies were found in the school, not burned but roasted by the heat. Those who had sought shelter in the pool fared no better. Over 1,000 bodies were found in the pool, which had been filled with water the night before, but was completely dry by morning. The B-29 circled over Tokyo for over an hour, feeding the growing fire with more fuel. Japanese air defenses, as anticipated, were weak and ineffective. Some B-29s were caught in flashbulbs as panicked crews watched every available weapon trained on their bombers. But the Japanese anti-aircraft's gunners failed to cause serious damage. The B-29s were simply too fast, too low, and too numerous to be stopped. Although the air defenses posed no great threat to the B-29 bombers, the bombs they were dropping in, the devastation caused by the firestorm, created massive turbulence. The turbulence was so intense that the bombers experienced sudden changes in altitude of up to 1,000 feet, 300 meters up or down. In some cases, the winds turned some B-29s upside down in the air, much to the surprise of their crews. They only realized they were inverted when all the equipment inside the plane fell on them, and the flames that had been below were now above. As the bombers passed over the target area and opened the cargo bay doors to release their loads, many of the crews were greeted by a foul odor. Menard David, one of the bombardiers, recalled when the cargo bay doors opened, the plane filled with smoke coming from the ground, and we smelled something horrible. We closed the doors as soon as we dropped the bombs and headed out to sea. The odor was still so strong inside the plane that the pilot ordered me to open them again to let in fresh air. You can imagine what was happening below us. The odor, of course, was the smell of burning human flesh. Casualties on the ground were so significant that the odor permeated the planes and the flight suits of the crews 4 days after the attack. After the meeting house attack, Tokyo burned for days. Human bodies littered the streets, seemingly at every turn in the targeted area. Piles of charred ash littered the streets on street corners, and inside homes served as grim reminders that a human being had burned to death there. Mounds of bodies fused together, forming heaps over 2 meters high, were a common sight throughout the region. The city's river had been reduced to a trickle as piles of corpses floated downstream, clumping around bridges and blocking the flow like a horrific and grotesque dam. It would be weeks before Tokyo authorities could begin removing the dead in clearing the debris. Post-attack analysis revealed that Tokyo's capacity to produce war material, or any material at all, had been 6 square miles of the once bustling capital city were leveled. Over 1 million people were left homeless in the aftermath of the attack, and over 250,000 buildings and homes were destroyed. Morale among the citizens of Tokyo plummeted for the first time. Many realized that the war was lost. Their government could feed them all the false propaganda it wanted, but the burning message was literally written on the walls. The initial estimate of 110,000 dead was all anyone needed to know to confirm the point. American casualties were significantly lower, to say the least. About 90 airmen went missing after the raid, and 14 B-29s never returned due to enemy fire or accidents. General Lamai, in his superior General Hub Arnold, considered Operation Meeting House a great success. The mission to destroy Japanese domestic industry, at least in Tokyo, had been successfully completed. The positive impact of Meeting House was so significant that the firebombing of Japanese cities did not stop after March 9th and 10. In the same week, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe and Nagoya again were all firebombed. The bloodshed would not stop anytime soon. Firebombing continued to devastate Japanese cities throughout the country. In total, air raids on Japan, including incendiary, conventional, and later nuclear, continued until August 10, 1945. The sheer destruction and violence of the attacks achieved their goal. An amphibious invasion of Japan was not necessary. Only after the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by nuclear weapons did Emperor Hirohito finally admit defeat. This occurred only after hundreds of thousands of his subjects had died from aerial bombing. According to a victorious report from the United States, over 50% of Tokyo's industry was located in residential and commercial areas. The firebombing caused a 50% reduction in the city's total output. The eastern areas of Tokyo were an especially hard hit, with around 1.2 million people living in the bomb districts. The devastation was immense, with 171 buildings destroyed, leaving over 1 million people homeless. According to the Tokyo police, Emperor Hirohito's visits to the destroyed areas of Tokyo in March 1945 marked the beginning of his personal involvement in the peace process that culminated in Japan's surrender 6 months later. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey later estimated that nearly 88,000 people died in the attack. 41,000 were injured, and over 1 million residents were left homeless. The Tokyo Fire Department estimated even higher numbers, at 97,000 dead and 125,000 injured. After the war, Tokyo faced significant challenges in rebuilding. In 1945 and 1946, the city received a portion of the national reconstruction budget that roughly reflected the extent of the bombing damage, around 26.6%. In the following years, however, the share of resources allocated to Tokyo diminished considerably. By 1949, the city received only 10.9% of the budget, and during this period, the country also faced rampant inflation, causing money to rapidly lose its value. The occupation authorities, led by figures such as Joseph Dodge, took steps to drastically scale back the Japanese government's reconstruction programs. Rather than focusing on comprehensive recovery projects, they concentrated their efforts on improving roads and transportation. As a result, Tokyo did not experience rapid economic growth until the 1950s. In 2007, members of the Association of Bereaved Families of the Tokyo bombing victims filed a class action lawsuit against the Japanese government, demanding an apology and compensation of 1.232 billion yuan. The lawsuit accused the Japanese government of provoking the attack by failing to end the war sooner and then failing to assist the civilian victims of the bombings, while providing substantial support to retired military personnel and their families. The plaintiff's case was dismissed at its first trial in December 2009, and their appeal was rejected. They then appealed to the Supreme Court, which dismissed the case in May 2013. In 2013, during Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's second term, Abe's cabinet stated that the attacks were incompatible with humanitarianism, which is a foundation of international law, but also noted that it is difficult to argue whether the attacks were illegal under international law at the time. Today, the Tokyo War Damage and Air Raid Center are located far from the city center and is far less well known or visited than the Hiroshima Peace Memorial and Museum. In 2018, fewer than 10,000 people, including school groups, visited central Tokyo, compared with more than 1.5 million people who visited the Hiroshima memorials that same year. When he was 12 years old, Katsumoto Saotomi narrowly escaped the bombing of Tokyo. Now 87, he remembers what happened with extraordinary clarity. Katsumoto Saotomi said he understood that Hiroshima was unique in that it was the first place nuclear bombs were used anywhere in the world. Tokyo was one of many cities where firebombs were dropped, he said. It was nothing new or unusual because they were dropped everywhere. The atomic bombings also had more time to sink into the collective consciousness of post-war memories, as survivors began sharing their testimonies soon after the war ended. Victims of the Tokyo bombings, by contrast, did not tell their stories until long after the war ended. People who are of a generation only slightly older than mine, he said, why were they silent? In 1971, published the testimonies of 7 survivors. In addition to his own modeling his writing on John Hersey's famous New Yorker report on the immediate aftermath of the Hiroshima bombing, Saotomi's book sold some 550,000 copies. Saotomi, now retired as museum director, said he does not seek an apology from the United States. He recalled that he once befriended an American B-29 pilot who had visited Japan to identify the spot where he had parachuted into a plane. But when Saotomi tried to show him a film recreating the night of the bombing, the pilot hesitated. Maybe it was too vivid for him, Saotomi said. It was dark underneath the planes. That footage was so real that it really disturbed him. Saotomi also said he could never forgive his own government for awarding Curtis LeMay, the architect of the Tokyo bombing, The Order of Merit First Class of the Grand Cordon of the Rising Sun for helping to establish Japan's modern air force after the war. That's totally unacceptable, he said, but Sotom is perhaps harder on himself. Despite having dedicated most of his adult life to honoring the memory of the survivors of the Tokyo bombing, he lamented that the public has failed to recognize the significance of what was lost or who suffered that night. He worries that his time is running out. I don't know how many more years I can continue, he said. As other survivors pass away, to make people understand, we should have raised our voices much louder, he said. We should have tried much harder, but it wasn't enough. If you feel this video brought you value in any way, please subscribe to the channel. Fasvim series. See you soon.